The images coming out of Ukraine are shocking. Injured, pregnant women fleeing for their lives, children buried into rubble, and bodies dumped into ditches. Kamala Harris in Poland called for an investigation into Russia committing war crimes, but stopped short of calling Putin's attacks war crimes. Just today, Biden signed an executive order placing a new round of sanctions on Russia's economy, and some are worried about a possible Russian chemical attack in Ukraine. Joining me now with military analysis is retired Special Ops Air Force Major Glenn Ignacio. Good to see you, Major Ignacio. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Well, I know you may be headed to Ukraine soon to assist in a humanitarian mission. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, let's start with Biden's announcement this morning. The president announced new trade sanctions on Russia just today. Many argue all of our sanctions came too late. In Romania, Kamala Harris said the U.S. is sending $13.6 billion in security and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. And a total of 2,000 American troops are at NATO's eastern flank, ready to defend our allies. Do you think the administration acted too late, especially with these sanctions? And do you see Putin taking further action into NATO countries?
Directly to answer your question, yes, it is too late. Sanctions take time. I mean, you're going to see those impacts financially over the next month or a couple of months. You know, Russia will be in dire straits probably in June, but that doesn't really matter for now, where actions could have been taken while the buildup was occurring. And while they were surrounding Ukraine, as we all see, you know, we've got the hindsight 2020, but we all knew that this was coming. So the actions have been pretty poor. The big point for going into NATO would be really an act of war for Putin to escalate this. Now, we have articles in the NATO contract that states if one country is attacked, then all countries will come to the aid of that particular country. Now, that's the problem, is that Ukraine wasn't a member of NATO, so that's why we have so many difficulties in trying to engage directly with Russia to protect them.
Yeah, you know, Putin is accusing the U.S. and Ukraine of working together to make chemical and bioweapons to use against Russia. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, said yesterday, if you want to know what Russia is planning, look at what they're accusing others of doing. So do you think Russia is planning a chemical attack?
So one of the things that Russia is absolutely great at is deception and also false flag. So you see false flag a lot. Let me explain that. So say Russia was to send their troops in dressed like Ukrainians and then attack Russia. It makes it look like Ukraine started it, but it's actually Russian forces. So that's what a false flag operation is. Now, biolabs and chemical labs are in many countries around the world, and many times there's efforts from the United States and others to help fend off diseases. But because that lab does exist and it's gotten so much attention, if Russia can attack Ukraine with chemical weapons and then say it was Ukraine actually doing it because of the chemical lab, that again is a false flag operation, and that's what they do. It's in his playbook. So in that case, it looks like Ukraine is using the chemical weapons, so Russia's retaliating. So that's what false flag is, and that's what Russia likes to do. And now they have an opportunity because it's getting so much visibility.
Yeah, interesting. You know, Putin is the master deceiver, like you said, and is claiming that Ukrainians are spreading misinformation. So we'll see what happens. It's very scary to think about. Let's talk about the no-fly zone now at face value.
Sure.
U.S. implementing a no-fly zone against Russia seems like a good idea, right, to help keep Ukrainians safe. I heard someone ask, why doesn't the U.S. just shoot down planes that are bombing hospitals? Given your expertise, what possible repercussions would a no-fly zone over Ukraine have?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've done no-fly zones in places like Iraq, the northern and southern no-fly zone. And that was for humanitarian aid because at that time, Iraq was attacking their people. And it's almost the same thing that we have here, is that Russia is indiscriminately killing civilians, which is brutal. So the idea of taking out their air support would be key. Sure would be. But here's the thing, again, because Ukraine is not a NATO country, is any kind of no-fly zone has to do two things. It has to protect the area, which means the potential of shooting down other aircraft, which, again, because it's NATO, Russia, would be considered an act of war, like it or not. The other thing you have to think about is if our aircraft or any other NATO aircraft are in the no-fly zone, they could be facing surface-to-air missiles, and those missiles would have to be taken out. Now, those are either in Russian territory or they're managed by Russian troops, which would then be killing, unfortunately, Russian military personnel, another act of war. So that's why. And so the no-fly zone may prevent them from attacking, But really, what needs to happen is clear military intervention to stop them from doing something. That's the hard part, why they kill civilians, just indiscriminately right now.
Yeah, I think Senator Marco Rubio would agree with you because he said the implications of shooting down an aircraft of the Russian Federation would be the beginning of World War III. Well, let's talk about the U.S. rejecting Poland's offer to send fighter jets to Ukraine. Part of the deal was that U.S. would have to replace Poland's fleet with American fighter jets. Again, seems like a good idea, right? But could Polish fighter jets in Ukraine potentially launch us into World War III?
So interesting perspective and watching things that have been happening with the U.S. and U.S. State Department statements. I'm unfortunately used to this sort of spin from the Afghan extraction, what the State Department said. So first of all is, Russia has the aircraft that Ukraine's used to flying. So if they sent their aircraft, they are leaving themselves possibly weak if something did happen outside of Ukraine. So let's think about that. So originally, the United States State Department said, hey, and the administration said, sure, go ahead, send those aircraft. So Poland would look like they're the ones that don't want to send it. So they come up with a different approach to say, hey, we'll do that, but we don't want to do directly from Polish territory because it'll look like we're aggressing it. How about if we send it to a NATO country and then send it into Ukraine? That was the only thing, was a change in logistics. And now the administration is saying no. So that's one of the interesting problems is first we green light to Poland when Poland was resistant. Now Poland is looking forward to donating those aircraft, and NATO's saying, or excuse me, the U.S. administration is saying no. So it's a flip-flop, and it's very, very confusing. But regardless, Ukraine is not getting that critical air support that they need.
Yeah, Russia, by the way, is losing logistical supplies. Its resupply convoy we've seen has been stuck for a while now. Food is running out as well. How much longer do you think Putin will be able to continue?
Well, here's the interesting part is because Russia is right up to Ukraine, is that there are a lot of supplies within the country that can be pushed in. But, the combined arms doctrine, so the way that Russia fights, they've always felt like if they fight in the countryside and they dominate the countryside, then the cities will fall. So they're not really the best trained in urban warfare like you see street to street. So it's interesting is that he's asking for volunteers out of Syria because those volunteers, those people that fought in Syria, are really good in street to street urban fighting. So that's where they're really engaged in right now. So by having this type of doctrine and Russia taking the countryside, they literally are left to two things in the cities, and that's either to bomb them to smithereens like we saw in Syria or to starve the people out. So the humanitarian crisis is just going to get worse. The other thing is in about 30 to 45 days, we have the thaws, and that mud will completely saturate. The Ukrainians call it a country without roads because the mud just stops all the roads and travel within the country. He has to also face that.
Let's talk about Putin's strategy now. I heard you say that another concern is why Russia is holding most of its well-trained troops in reserve. What do you think is the strategy? What do you think Putin is planning?
So, conscription is mandatory in Russia. So 18 to 25 years old, you have to do a year. And a lot of those conscripts were very poorly trained, only do a year service, have been used in the beginning here as a main part of the force. So when you do that with the poorly trained, you force the Ukrainians to fight, which burns their energy. It also uses supplies and weapons, and all those supplies and weapons have to be resupplied. So if he's able to push that out, get the reaction as he can, and then get more trained, more intense troops in, then it's an easier battle. It's like prepping the battlefield that we usually do with the air by taking out ground troops. He's actually doing this in a physical and a psychological standpoint to try to impact the Ukrainians so his well-trained forces will have a bigger impact. And, we do see some in, but not a lot. You see a lot of the conscription in so far.
Sounds like another deceptive strategy. We saw Putin meet with Xi Jinping before the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Do you think Putin coordinated with China beforehand? And then if so, do you think China will try something with Taiwan next?
Absolutely, yes. A very firm yes. We've thought this and we've seen this for a long time. China saying, hey, wait to attack Ukraine until after the Olympics. The coordination with China is absolutely critical for the two. They're the only ones that are backing it up. In fact, you saw big Russian and China energy deals before the invasion, coal deals and others. So Russia is going to be greatly supported by China. Now, China is watching this almost as a case study. They're going to see what happens with the entire international environment. I think that the international community has reacted even more than Putin originally understood. He's a great strategist, but China wants to take Taiwan just like they're taking Ukraine. There is nothing better than to watch the international community and the military operations and the response before they take Taiwan. I believe in this administration, because it's always been weak, that this would be the time that Taiwan is taken by China, as scary as that may sound.
Very scary. This world conflict is far from over. Finally, and arguably most importantly, tell us about the humanitarian mission in Ukraine you're hoping to assist in, and how can we help?
Sure. First of all, I'll get that right out. A couple of organizations, which is E3 Ranch Foundation, is a great group that's helping, and also helpukraine22.org. These are two groups that are significantly focused on humanitarian aid. Now, you have to think about it, is there's a lot of civilians that have been trying to move. There's a lot of people that have been hurt because of this indiscriminate killing. So these organizations are happening on the border and actually in country to help wounded, ambulatory, non-ambulatory, children, women, anybody that's been hurt that wants to get out. So these groups have gone over there. They're mainly a lot of Americans, prior American military, and people of action. We don't like talking. We saw a lot of that in Afghanistan. We got engaged, and that's the same thing that we're doing here in the Ukraine. We do action. We don't talk like this administration.
Okay, let's give that those two names to our viewers again. E3 Ranch Foundation, and second one?
helpukraine22.org. helpukraine22.org.
Perfect. Major Glenn Ignacio, thank you for all that you do and your help in Ukraine, and thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and bringing the visibility straight forward to the American people. Thank you.
Absolutely.